Thank you all for allowing me to have a few moments with you here today. This building is certainly a tribute to the generosity and philanthropy and communal commitment of the Dineen family, many of whom are here in front, and Bob and Janine Olivier and the rest of the family, my colleague, Judge King. Thank you so very much. I hope I won't embarrass you, Carolyn, but after I heard about the gift, I called Carolyn. I had not known her at the time. I think she was still chief of the Fifth Circuit, to thank her for her generosity. And she said, Ted, I'm a judge like you. You got to thank my family for this. This one. So, but this is more than just a celebration of philanthropy. It is a marvelous facility that is important not only to the legal education, but also to our community. When I first walked through this building, I was amazed at how generous the genius of the architects had been in designing it, in converting what is probably Syracuse's biggest liability into an asset. My guess is, when asked in general, of the general public, what is the biggest problem with attending Syracuse University, without hesitation, people would say the weather. A few weeks ago, I guess a couple months now, I attended a send-off in Philadelphia, which is an opportunity for board members to meet with incoming freshmen and their students. And the questions that we got focused on security and academics, as one would expect, but an equal number focused on the weather. And I remember one mother coming up to me, and she specifically asked if there was an REI in Syracuse. And I said, why are you concerned with an REI? And she said, well, because their down, I found, provides the most warmth. So, so how perfect it is then that one of the main features of the largest common space in this building is that magnificent fireplace out in front. An invitingly warm and comfortable space where members of the community can gather and interact on what might otherwise be a cold, snowy, and dreary day. One other thing that is immediately apparent when entering the building and walking through the various hallways is the transparency that shines throughout. As Richard Gluckman, the chief architect, explained to me, the building was designed to encourage communication and collaboration that comes from communication and interaction. What could be more appropriate for a building that trains people in the law? The importance of interaction and communication to democratic institutions cannot be minimized. So it is quite fitting that this building incorporates transparency as a key element of its design. Yet, despite the magnificence of this utility and the practicality of Dineen Hall, it is important that we not forget that the work of each of us will ultimately define this building. We will define it by our deeds, our commitment to excellence, and to our community. As Winston Churchill once remarked, first we build our buildings, and then our buildings build us. Thus, although many have had a hand in erecting Dineen Hall, in years to come, Dineen Hall will be known by what we do with the legal education it provides. As noble and majestic as this building is, it will ultimately be judged not just by its splendor alone, but by the splendor and majesty of the achievements and the many contributions of the teachers and students who attend here. However, candor forces me to acknowledge the 500-pound gorilla in the room. As we gather here today to celebrate this new building, I would be remiss in not acknowledging that given the economic difficulties in recent times and the drop in law school applications and enrollment, some will no doubt question the wisdom of a university devoting substantial resources to building a new law school. I submit to you such skepticism and myopia fails to appreciate the true importance of a legal education. A great university needs to provide a quality legal education. Although the vast majority of graduates will almost certainly end up practicing attorneys, those who question the value of a legal education or building a new law school should realize the practical value of a legal education. Law graduates run public health programs, immigrant worker centers, storefront medical legal partnerships, grant-making programs, environmental advocacy groups, and educational programs of all kinds that are captains of finance and industry. Law graduates constitute a significant percentage of our congressional representatives, governors, mayors, and city council persons in every city in this country. Although the percentage of lawyers who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies has declined in the last 40 years, as of the time of the last survey in 2012, 10% of all CEOs of Fortune 500 companies had law degrees. The universality and the versatility of legal training is still unequal. The traditional lawyer skills of rhetoric and manipulation of legal materials, case analysis, and argument from analogy that are taught in law school prepare law students to be contributing and respectful members of their communities. Being a good lawyer means being able to acquire a working knowledge in science, statistics, technology, or whatever other discipline is involved in a client's case. In the words of one observer, quote, "Law graduates form the educated elites of our states. They are the influencers and thinkers charged with upholding constitutional values and discerning the correct response to international crises at both the local and national level," end quote. The law deals in intangibles. It deals in subtleties and nuances. I know of no other intellectual training where seeing and understanding the views of someone who are counter to your own views is so much a part of the educational enterprise. As you know, legal training not only requires us to understand views that we might disagree with, it often requires us to adopt the opposing viewpoint as our own and argue it as if it were one that we firmly believed in. This important aspect of legal training is often ignored in discussions about jobs and income levels and enrollment rates. But I believe it may be the most important rejoinder to those who say we have too many lawyers and do not need another law school. Can anyone seriously doubt the value of this kind of intellectual rigor that I have just described at a time when our society has somehow arrived at a point where ideological zealotry and the concomitant fear of compromise has become a major feature of our democratic institutions and a constant refrain in the media? We have reached a point where significant numbers of elected officials place more importance on fidelity and a pledge about fiscal policy to a private citizen than they do their own sworn duty to govern for the public good. In the process, compromise for the general good has become identified with betrayal of principle, even though the U.S. Constitution that our elected leaders have sworn to uphold is perhaps one of the greatest examples of compromise. Law schools continue to be a vital part of society and vital to society because the law is what knits the various threads of this society into a whole fabric. And make no mistake about it, we cannot afford to become comfortable, relaxed, or smug in the conviction that our democratic institutions are so firmly entrenched and our democratic values so firmly established that our liberties are secure. Edmund Burke explained why this is true nearly 3 centuries ago when he warned, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." And to paraphrase that, I would state, all that is necessary for the downfall of democratic institutions is for good people to do nothing. This magnificent room was made possible by the generous philanthropy of Melanie Gray, and of course the building was made possible by the great philanthropy of the Dineen family. When Melanie spoke at the law school's orientation in August, she said, and I quote, "The future belongs to lawyers devoted to the public good." I hope you don't mind that I was writing while you were speaking, Melanie. I hope that she was right. A few years ago, the University of Connecticut conducted a State of the First Amendment survey in an attempt to assess how Americans feel about the Bill of Rights. The findings are less than reassuring. 34% of Americans polled said the First Amendment goes too far. 46% said there was too much freedom of the press. 50% thought the government should have the right to infringe on religious freedom of certain religious groups in the name of the war on terror. 31% wanted public protest of a war to be outlawed during that war. And perhaps as disturbing as any, 28% felt that newspapers should not be able to publish articles without the prior approval of the government. Try to reconcile that with the text of the First Amendment. The numbers may be somewhat skewed because the poll was taken closer in time to the hellish destruction of September 11, but perhaps that makes the numbers even more profound, more troubling, and more meaningful. If fundamental liberties are contingent upon current events and external circumstances, one might ask, how fundamental are they? Anyone who is not concerned about that query should think about Fred Korematsu and the Supreme Court's ratification of the roundup of Japanese citizens in Korematsu versus the United States. Cases like Korematsu and Plessy versus Ferguson illustrate the imperfection and the frailty of the law and our legal system. They illustrate that fundamental liberties can be held hostage to popular opinion, prejudice, and current events. they also teach us of the continuing need for informed participation and for legal education. Nevertheless, despite historic aberrations in constitutional interpretation, such as Korematsu and Plessy versus Ferguson, to paraphrase Martin Luther King, I believe that the arc of the legal universe is long, but it bends toward justice. However, the gravitational force of justice is not perfect, it is not constant, nor is it absolute. Closer in time than the poll I've just mentioned to you is the statement of a leading contender for his party's presidential nomination in the 2008 election. The candidate, who had a substantial lead in the polls for a period of time, boasted that, if he were president, he would send marshals to arrest judges who issued controversial decisions and would have those judges appear before Congress to explain their decisions. Now, he may not, although he was a lawyer himself, may not have understood that we do explain our decisions. We have these things called opinions that we spend an inordinate of time writing. It'd probably be cheaper and have less physical impact if congresspersons would just read our opinions rather than having us arrested. But that's technical. He also proclaimed that if elected, he would order his national security personnel to disobey any order of the Supreme Court that he deemed inconsistent with the nation's security. So this thing about separation of powers he may not have been aware of either, and who interprets the law, but I digress. As I listened to those statements, I waited for the public outcry that I was sure would follow. It did not follow, and I am still waiting. It may be that those statements were merely the product of political pandering and to an extreme faction of the candidate's party. But even assuming that to be true, it does not make such statements by a candidate for President of the United States any less offensive or dangerous. The candidate obviously thought that the political climate was such that the risk of making such statement was outweighed by the benefit of winning increased popularity from a segment of his party's base. Judging from the absence of any outcry against such sentiment and the absence of any widespread reporting of those statements, he may well have been right. Too many of our fellow citizens simply do not care enough to get involved in the democratic process at the most basic and least inconvenient level of self-government. One would be hard-pressed to find a midterm election when more than 1 in 3 persons who were eligible to vote bothered to vote. Thus, even though control of Congress hangs in the balance, 2 out of every 3 persons who otherwise could vote simply don't bother to. Courts cannot preserve liberties when so many of the governed either disagree with the underlying principles of democracy, do not understand them, or do not want to be inconvenienced enough to engage in the political process at even the most fundamental and perhaps least inconvenient level. Albert Einstein said much the same thing as Edmund Burke when Einstein warned, quote, "The world is a dangerous place not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on without doing anything." So I hope you will understand why I think those who say we do not need to build a law school simply do not appreciate the value of a legal education or its importance to maintaining a critical mass of citizens who understand the complexity, subtlety, and nuances of our constitutional guarantees. Even though a legal education continues to be one of the best ways to develop intellect and prepare people for citizenship, if the arc of justice is to continue to bend toward the recognition of individual liberty, it will need the kind of informed citizenry that great universities and great law schools produce. Law schools do more, however, than educate lawyers. Investment in a law school, I submit to you, is an investment in the legal system and therefore an investment in society. Now, before I conclude, it is important that I not ignore the fact that neither a legal education nor a law degree is any guarantee that one will devote himself or herself and the training to bettering his or her community. An example of the limitations of a legal education can be seen in an article that appeared in the online English language edition of the German magazine Spiegel in 2008. The article included a story of a young lawyer named Walter Bloom. Bloom's father had also been a lawyer as well as a teacher. Years after graduating from law school and successfully completing the German equivalent of the bar exam, Bloom was one of those who were convicted of crimes against humanity at Nuremberg. He had decided to join the SS upon graduating from law school. Now, that may be an extreme example, but nevertheless, I think it makes the point. We must realize that despite the intrinsic value of a legal education, it is no guarantee that law graduates will be motivated to use their training to advance the common good. A legal education is neither a substitute for nor a guarantee of a properly tuned moral compass. Rather, the value of a legal education must be viewed in context with Melanie's admonition back in August during orientation that we do something to improve our communities. There are many ways to do that, and I've alluded to a few of them, and no degree does a better job of preparing us than a law degree. I therefore want to conclude with two quotes that I want to share with you. The first is from an essay written by a Texas jurist. He recounted that his father had taught him that, and I'm quoting, "In the end, one's life will not be measured in terms of physical possessions gathered during life, but in terms of the impact he or she made on the lives of those left behind." The other is one that actually Melanie alluded to a few minutes ago in her wonderful introduction. It's from Lewis Katz. Lou was a very dear friend of mine who was tragically killed in an airplane crash this spring. You may have heard about it because it made national news because Lou was a former owner of several professional sports franchises. A few short weeks before he died, Lou spoke at the undergraduate ceremony, commencement ceremony at Temple University. During that address, he said something that I know he would want to be remembered for, and it's something that has resonated in me as suggested in Melanie's introduction. He said, and I quote, "You will never live a perfect day until you do something for someone who can never repay you." By that measure, the Dineen family has many, many perfect days ahead. But our legal education affords each of us many opportunities to help someone who will never be able to repay us, and it is up to each of us not to squander those opportunities. Whether it be through the practice of law and pro bono representation, running a nonprofit organization, or one of the other countless ways a law degree can enrich your future and your community, I hope you will use these opportunities when they present themselves, and that each of you will find a way to have many perfect days. You will receive a wonderful legal education here at Syracuse, and I hope that everyone in the audience appreciates that, because it's important that you do. When Chancellor Severud gave his inaugural address, he referred to Syracuse University as a university for the, quote, unentitled, close quote. And as I told him in subsequent emails, that phrase really resonated with me. Yet make no mistake, even though it may be an education for the unentitled, Syracuse University provides a top-quality legal education. Syracuse graduates, the University of Law graduates, are leaders nationally in litigation, as witnessed by Melanie and her activities and success, business, finance, and my guess is if you were to ask the Vice President of the United States if his legal education had served him well, he'd probably say yes, that he was glad he went to Syracuse. And it wouldn't be based upon the number of registered Democrats in the Syracuse area. It's something I think he believes. During the more than 20 years that I have served on a federal appellate court, I have presided over legal arguments made by some of the most renowned appellate advocates in the country, many of whom are on the faculty of those elite law schools that come to mind when we think of the entitled and the nation's elite law schools. I have taken an active role in conferences with my colleagues following those arguments. Many of my colleagues have degrees from one or more of the law schools we think of as schools for the entitled. For many years, more than 10 years, I had the privilege of engaging in conferences, very spirited legal discussions, and exchanging legal memos with a then colleague who is now an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court and who graduated from a law school that many may think of as an elite law school for the entitled. Yet I can truthfully say to you today, without moments of hesitation or the least bit of equivocation, that I have never, ever thought that I was any the less prepared than someone who went to one of those elite law schools because of the legal training I received here at Syracuse University College of Law. And my guess is if you were to ask many of the successful alums who are here today about how they feel about their training here, they would say the same thing. A few months ago, I had the privilege of swearing in a new federal judge in Arizona, in Tucson, who had clerked for me as one of the very first law clerks I had hired, and one of my current clerks is a Syracuse alum. And we started talking about our experience here at Syracuse, and all three of us agreed that if we could go back in some way, get a hold of Mr. Peabody's time machine. The young folks don't know what that is, but if we could go back in time and change the school that we're going to go to law school at, none of us would have made our decision any differently. We all would have been thankful that we had the option to attend Syracuse and would have gladly attended it. So I repeat that I have never ever thought that I was any the less prepared than someone who went to one of those elite law schools because of the legal training I received here at Syracuse University College of Law. I am proud to be a graduate of Syracuse College of Law, and I know that you will be every bit as proud of this wonderful institution and this wonderful building as I am if you make the most of the opportunity that it affords you and work hard, and I mean that, work hard while you are here. You owe that to your community and yourselves and to this law school. You owe it to yourselves to take full advantage of all that Dineen Hall has to offer. If you do that, take an active role in your communities and use your legal training to help others, you will also have many perfect days ahead. Maybe not as many as the Dineens, but you will have many perfect days ahead. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the program as planned for today. Enjoy your time here in this wonderful, magnificent building at Dineen Hall. Thank you.